wanted to focus on our audience, companies with more than 100 employees. And we call you the elite 2%. And you'll see on my slide that it is very true. The elite 2% are different, and they need to do things differently. So what are the elite 2%? According to statistics, there are only 2% of companies that ever reach over 10 million. All the companies we work with at Gazelles Systems have broken this barrier significantly, and they're elite because they figured out a way to be better than 98% of the firms out there. They typically have great people, they have great strategic ideas for growth, and they have enough cash that they don't worry about payroll anymore. They're thinking about deploying their cash to grow their business. But in working with these people around the world, we found that the elite 2%, it's not always so easy. They have more people, they have more opportunities to consider, and they have lots more decisions that need to get made. And for the elite 2%, things start to get very complicated very fast. So when elite 2% companies reach this ceiling of complexity, they tend to hit walls. For some of them, it's a growth wall. Some of them, it's a people wall, a profit wall, maybe a scalability wall. And they need tools to help them break through the wall and get their teams focused and aligned. At Gazelles Systems, that's what we do. We are experts at creating a system that enables elite 2% companies to push through this wall and organize their teams so they can grow with purpose. Our coaching team has helped elite 2% companies around the world, and we are delighted today to have two of them here to help you break through any walls that you have. So we're looking forward to sharing answers to questions that have been mailed in, and also enjoy having anything that you want to ask about to help you today. So let me introduce to you Barry and Kris. You can see their pictures here so you can have an idea of who you're chatting with. They are experts at working with the elite 2% firms, and they're happy to share practical tips and insights with you. So for us, it's afternoon. Good afternoon, Barry and Kris.
Good afternoon.
Hello, glad to be here.
Welcome. And for our international clients, whether it's morning, night, wherever it may be, we welcome you as well. So Kris and Barry also post practical tips and insights on our company blog every week. So to follow them and our other coaches, feel free to complete our survey at the end of the webcast, and we'll make sure that you get signed up so you can receive some of those insights. So let's get started. We want to start with some of the questions that people sent in advance. At any time, this is your webcast for you. Feel free to type in your questions, and we'll answer your questions as soon as we can. We have 1 hour today, and so we're going to do our best to answer everyone's question. But if we don't get to your question, do not worry. We will make sure to answer it in a blog that we'll be putting out next week. So let's get started. So the first series of questions that we got were all about meeting rhythms for the elite 2%. As I said, it's much more complicated when you have lots of levels. Maybe you are in lots of countries, lots of different areas. So what we found is that most of the clients we work with, they already have some type of meeting rhythm before they start working with us. Almost all are doing annual and quarterly planning. Many are doing weekly meetings. But the number one question we got is, how do I make these meetings more effective? Many of the companies wrote us and they shared that they do meeting rhythms, but their team is still not as focused and aligned as they want them to be. They're extremely skillful, they're working really hard, they're just not getting the results they were getting when they might have been smaller and a little more nimble, a little more focused. So let me share with you a few things larger companies might want to think about when setting up and doing your meeting rhythms. So I know this might sound very simple, but one of the things I'd like to share before we have Kris and Barry do some deep dives into practical tools and things is that in order to have an effective meeting rhythm, one of the simplest, most practical things you can do is to make sure that everyone is abundantly clear about the purpose of the meeting. If people know the purpose of the meeting and why they're there and what it will take to make that meeting successful, you'll have a better meeting. So I just wanted to take a moment and quickly review the meetings we suggest you have, the meeting rhythm for the elite 2%, and then I'll have Kris and Barry share some practical tips and insights to make your meeting better. Let's start with annual planning. The purpose of annual planning is to drive your long-term strategy. I know that sounds very simple, but elite 2% companies tend to have so many great ideas and such skillful people that they get very, very excited at annual planning about the abundance of opportunities that they want to take advantage of. The bad news is you're going to have to choose. So you want to make sure that you pick the right few things in annual planning that are going to have the highest, greatest impact on driving your long-term strategy. How do you do that? You anchor the beginning of every meeting by stating the purpose of the meeting. Executive team, we are here at annual planning. Why? Because we want to choose the right things to drive our long-term strategy. Things that we have enough energy to do, and we want to choose with purpose and manage our energy. Quarterly planning. Quarterly planning is to anchor and pick priorities that are going to drive your annual plan. Again, one of the biggest challenges the elite 2% have is that they have to find a way to manage energy on two tracks. They tend to have multi-million-dollar businesses. Those are their base business that they want to keep healthy, and you've got to apply energy and priorities towards that. And in addition to that, you also want to apply energy towards growing your business and getting better. With purpose, you want to state at quarterly planning that we want to do these two things, and it's also got to be linked to moving forward our annual plan and our long-term strategy. So feel free to ask Kris and Barry more about that. They're going to address that in a couple moments, but make sure that people understand why we're there for the quarterly meeting. Monthly meetings, those are interesting. What we have found is that if you are thinking about driving your long-term strategy forward, you do not do that in a 1 or 2 day event. You need to have a thinking rhythm to purposefully move that forward. For a lot of our clients, we're using monthly meetings to purposely work on our long-term strategy. Maybe you're working on your new brand promise. Maybe you're working on your BHAG and trying to find ways to accelerate that. Maybe you're working on your core purpose or your people. Things that you might be stuck on are another great way to use your monthly meeting. If you can get unstuck on something big, it frees you up to be focused on strategic thinking and moving your long-term strategy. Weekly meetings. We are asked about weekly meetings all the time. The purpose of the weekly meeting is to make adjustments to your 90-day plan. You want to keep your plan on track. It's critical. In order to make adjustments, you must have metrics. If you do not have metrics, you're not going to know whether you're on track or not. And your team must bring insights to be able to share with you why things are off track so you can make decisions quickly. We're going to deep dive into weekly meetings. It was a lot of questions that came in there. Last two, daily huddles. Daily huddles are a place to clear out things we call stucks. I like to refer to them as gnats. They're annoying little things, and if they add up, they're going to muck up your weekly meeting. You do not want to spend time at your weekly meeting trying to clear away little gnats. You are trying to keep your plan on track that's going to drive your long-term strategy. Daily huddles really help you do that, and especially when you're larger and you have very bright, smart, skillful people. You want them working on real work. You want to take every little thing out of their way so they could give you their best efforts. The last thing, and this is sort of a new concept for our elite 2% that we've decided to focus on, are what we call other meetings. It's happening all the time. In between your weekly meetings, you're having meetings all the time. How do you use those meetings well? Why are you even having meetings? When you have other meetings, the number one thing we work with our clients on is to have them with purpose. Why are we here doing the work? One of the greatest suggestions we have is to start every other meeting by saying, we will be successful if. If you know why you're there, you're going to have a better meeting. So I hope that that's helpful for you. It's been a big question. As co-founder, I talked to a lot of our clients, and this is something that we've had discussions on privately that help to clarify for them how to organize their people in meetings. So with that, I'd like to get started with some very specific questions that we received on meeting rhythms to do this. We got a question from John in Chicago. Hello, John. You're here. I thank you for being on the webcast and for sharing your question in advance. His question was, we have multiple layers in our organization: executive team, functional groups, supervisors, frontline employees. What is the best way for us to do quarterly planning? So let's kick it off with Kris today.
All right, thanks, Cindy. I think the best thing to start with when we talk about quarterly planning is kind of going back to what Cindy was talking about as far as what's the purpose of quarterly planning. You have to plan with purpose. The purpose of the quarterly plan is to create and align your team around a winning plan for the next 90 days, right? So what are the priorities? What are the things that are most important that we must accomplish in the next 90 days? To get to the winning plan, you first need to check in with your long-term strategy. How are we doing? Are we making progress? Do we still feel that we're moving in the right direction? Where are we, and are we connecting with that strategy? The next thing is to check your progress on your annual plan. How are you doing? Are you moving forward? Do you have the right momentum? Are these still the right things that we want to be working on? So once you do that and you consider, what other current opportunities have come in, what has changed since we did our last quarterly planning, how are we doing on our key initiative milestones? Are there major events on the calendar for the next 90 days? Then you're really ready to start to focus and think about what is the main thing that we must accomplish in the next 90 days? What's the number one main thing? Once you have that, the next step is to get your 3 to 5 top priorities figured out and ready to go for the next 90 days. All of this is done at the executive team level. So this is your core group of executives that you bring together every 90 days, and you have these conversations and you set strategy for the company. You say, what's our plan for the next 90 days? But of course, with the elite 2%, you've got to go a little deeper than the executive team. You're big enough now that you've got to figure out, cascade this information down, and have your group levels and departments planning to put the active 5 top priorities. So what should happen next is that each executive team would meet with their direct reports, usually company plan, talk about some of the conversations that happened in that executive team meeting. What's important right now? What's our main focus for the 5 top priorities? The next thing that they'll want to have in that departmental meeting is talk about what role can the department play in achieving the company's goals, and then determine what are our, at the group level, at the departmental level, top priorities. What are the things that we're going to be committed to accomplishing that will support the company's priorities? In addition to that, each member of the departmental team needs to know what their individual priorities are. So already you can kind of see how this is cascading down from the company level with the executive team down to the departmental level, led by each member of the executive team, and then into the individuals of each one of those teams. Now, in the largest companies, this departmental planning step still won't reach every employee in the company. So it's important to talk about a communication plan that's going to really get all the way down to the frontline employees in your company. so that those people can also understand what the main focus is and what the top priorities are. And then especially what are the departmental priorities that they will play a role in? How are they directly involved in moving the ball forward? You can do this by continuing to cascade down with more meetings, and until everyone has been involved, or you can do it in an all-employee kind of a town hall style meeting, or at the very least, you could publish the plan in your company newsletter or on your company intranet, just, whatever methodology you have in place for communicating with all of the employees. Really, this quarterly planning process is one of your biggest opportunities to make adjustments to your annual plan and to keep everyone in the company focused, aligned, and accountable. And to be sure that you're following it all the way through. Don't lose that opportunity every 90 days.
Kris, I realize that one of the things that you and I talk about a lot with our clients is that we help them. We have to help them think and the things that they need to be doing to think ahead. And one of them is the quarterly planning process needs to start early enough for the executive team and then the cascade teams, so that it's happening early enough that in this 13-week race, at the moment the gate opens, day one of the quarter, that your team can start running. So you have to start that process early enough to allow that to happen so that they can exit on time.
Yeah, great point. You don't want to wait till week 4 in your 13-week race to get started.
Thank you. Well, let's move on to our next question that was emailed in. And that question is from Christina in New York. So thank you, Christina. Her question was about quarterly planning and themes. How are companies with a lot of employees using themes or a main thing to align their efforts each quarter? Barry, would you like to take that question?
I was thinking as you were talking that some of the themes that we hear are things like breaking barriers, headed west, breakthrough velocity, Rocket Man. In fact, with Rocket Man, I recall they had music and everything to go along with that theme. Those have been some of the types of themes that we've heard. Whatever it is, the idea is to get your t-shirts, your town halls, your meetings, everything aligned around this main theme so that you can create a rally cry that pulls your whole team together. It can be driven all the way to the front line of your organization. In fact, just recently at the summit in Orlando, the author of Turn the Ship Around, Captain David Marquet, recently said this. He said that you want to drive your decision-making down to where the information resides. So a critical number or metric is a great visual way that we found in working with our clients to help them with that type of alignment. Because when your company's big and they're growing, to grow an enterprise in terms of scalability, your agility, your alignment, it can only be achieved by having the right workers doing the right work at the right time at the right cost. And although top grading is not a focus of today's webcast, we recommend it as part of the success equation for all of our clients. I think one of the other things that I've seen is that we're often challenging our clients to use a critical number to challenge each department to figure out ways that they can actually contribute as well.
Thank you. Thank you. We had a question come in, and I don't know if Barry or Kris who would like to take it, but the question was, our department heads are so bought into Rockefeller habits, they want to develop their own things for their own departments. Is that something you recommend?
Well, my first and general answer is no. But the caveat is actually part of what you said earlier, Cindy, and that is that companies that are growing fast and large have to find new ways. They have to do things different and do them differently in order to succeed. And so the caveat for this is that larger, bigger, more complex organizations can add what we call sub-themes that actually align with the main theme of the company and then support that throughout the enterprise. Got it.
Thank you. So we've also had a few questions about weekly meetings, so let's answer them. The first question we had is, what is the best way to schedule weekly meetings if the executive team and departments are both doing them? Who would like to take that question?
I'll take that one. A lot of times when we see departments and groups meeting within a company, we try to schedule it so that the departmental groups are meeting first. That way the executive team is able to meet with the most up-to-date information, because ideally someone from the executive team, whoever's the head of that department, would be sitting in on that departmental meeting. So they're able to bring to the table, to the executive team meeting, whatever information, sort of the pulse of the company, what's going on and what's most important. We also find that it's best to have the executive team meeting and, of course, the departmental meetings as early in the week as possible, so that whatever action you have to take, the adjustments that you need to make to keep yourself on track, you're able to take those sooner rather than later. So, one example that we see is that a departmental meeting might be on a Friday or a Friday afternoon, and then the executive team meeting is Monday morning. That's a great way to get a really early jump on the week and to go into it strong with fresh information.
Great. Thank you, Kris. We also had another question emailed in. They said, our weekly meetings seem a little stale and repetitive. Can you give us some ideas to make them more effective?
Sure, yeah, I've got an idea there. We usually see this when the meetings are focused around status updates. When everybody's coming to the meeting and it's just the same thing week after week, we're talking about the same priorities, the same activities, and people are just telling, what they did this week and what the status of those would be. We actually recommend that you consider your weekly meeting your weekly adjustment meeting. And that's because 90% of your time should be used to discuss opportunities, brainstorming anything you're stuck on, identify and scale bright spots in the company, and create action plans that are going to get you, if you have a priority that's somewhere in yellow or red, that you can move that back to green and get it back on track so that you can finish it successfully. So once you're able to get away from status updates and into problem solving and opportunity brainstorming, then your meetings are going to become a lot more effective and be a lot less boring, for one thing. Another thing is people should always come to these meetings prepared. You've got to make that a habit and a discipline within your company, that people come with status already done. I mean, there's got to be some way, some type of visual dashboard. Of course, we recommend rhythm, but something, if you don't have rhythm, something that will work for you, that you can come in and within a moment's notice, you can tell exactly how you're doing. Are we on track? Are we running in the right direction? Also, anyone who does have a priority that's gotten behind, that's falling off track somehow, already has given some thought to what we're going to do to move it forward. Now, it may not be that that individual alone can solve that problem, but at least to bring the data and the information to let us know why that's off track, and give the team an opportunity to collaborate on the solution. That's going to really bring a lot of value to your meetings. And once you do that, move away from status updates, find some visual method to display those updates so that you're not wasting time on that, and get into solutions and problem solving and breaking barriers. That's when your meetings will be most effective.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kris. We have a question chatted in from Preston. Thank you, Preston. Preston's question was, I'm having problems differentiating weekly meetings from the daily huddle. Everybody wants to huddle on the weekly meeting. He would like to get some insight on that. So Barry, maybe you'd like to take that?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's why I put my hand up. Is that just recently I've heard that question. It's pretty common for us as coaches and working with clients. What is the difference between the two? The weekly meeting is one of 13. You have only 13 opportunities to get your quarter right. The daily meeting is the thing that you talked about earlier, which is the little gnats that are happening for sort of on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully that helps some. And I would finally say that it is really not to be legalistic. This is a chance to practice the Rockefeller habits that have been proven to work, but to do it in a way that adds value to your business. For example, if we're having a daily meeting today, we don't have a huddle today, unless it's people that are not going to attend that meeting that perhaps aren't part of that level of meeting, then they can still have their huddle. Additionally, I would say that if it's not adding value, you need to look at new ways to approach it. And that means that if you want to have a huddle type start to your daily meeting, or your weekly, excuse me, when you have your weekly meeting, you can start that way. But remember that the purpose is one of 13 opportunities. It is not one of 3, 4, or 5 for this particular week. It's for the entire quarter.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to share something on that too, Preston. I think that what Kris was talking about is staying focused. When you do your quarterly planning, you need to pick the 3 or 5 things you're going to focus on. And as Barry said, you should have a visual of those 3 to 5 things that you picked with purpose, that have the greatest, highest opportunity of moving your business forward. both maintaining your base business and growing. If you come to that meeting, the weekly meeting, and you have that list, it will keep you focused on the right conversations, so that weekly meetings are about moving your quarterly plan forward. And when you come to daily huddles, if you are focused on things that you are stuck in that day, you think about it for that day, that you need to get unstuck so you can free up your mind to do your work, that will be helpful as well. So thank you so much for that question. We have one more question, I believe one more question on meeting rhythms that came in. So the next question is, with so many departments and so many levels in our company, how do we connect and get everyone focused on the most important KPIs, those are key performance indicators, and critical numbers? Who would like to take that?
I'll take that one. So thinking about KPIs is very similar to the same way you would think about your quarterly planning and how you set the priorities. Start at the top level, at the company level with the executive team, and then cascade it down from that level to your departments. Take time to figure out, what are the most important things. Critical numbers are the 1 or 2 numbers that for that 90-day period you're really going to highlight, you're going to focus in on, and you're going to move forward. So along with those critical numbers, you have a couple of ongoing KPIs that you always want to measure too. What you need to do is allow each department to really take the time to figure out how they contribute to those KPIs. It may not be obvious. We saw Jack Stack at the Leadership Summit last week, and he talked about his story of the big turnaround, and their focus was on debt to equity ratio. And I thought, oh my goodness, that is not the kind of number, a critical number that any one person in the company can affect. I mean, it's truly a combination of a lot of different activities and metrics that they can all be managed, and they come together to generate the result of debt to equity. But that was his critical number. So what that required is that everybody in the company had to really think about the way that they can contribute to that outcome. So take the time to work through those components and then will create the results, and then get people focused on the parts that they can personally control. And then another thing is to make sure that, for whatever those few numbers are, you keep them very visible. You've got to have, again, with visual dashboards or a monitor, just something that can keep everyone aligned and very much aware of how the company is doing on those numbers that you have told them are most important. So if you believe they're most important, then it's worth finding a way to share them and keep people aware of progress.
Thank you, Kris.
Kris, one of the ways that we work with that and teaching our clients and what they can do and how to actually apply it, the application side is so important. You can have it in your mind, but if you can't apply it and get results, then it's not of help. It's a very simple way of just asking 5 whys. We're going to ask why, until we can quantify what it is that we're actually trying to do. A recent story for me was in Northeast U.S. here. I had a client who had a spreadsheet for salespeople. It was multiple pages, multiple columns, multiple math. It was just so complicated. It gave them fantastic information. But when their salespeople looked at it, they just went snowblind. They couldn't see it at all. And so what we did was we made some simple adjustments that actually allowed them to gain some fast traction. What I asked them to do is focus in on the top 5 or less numbers that they needed for their salespeople to be focused on, to put only those on the scoreboard of the dashboard, and then from that, they could start teaching them what steps they could take as salespeople to move that number in a positive direction. And we don't want to create something that's so busy, that's so full of information that our people look at it and say, yeah, but how are we doing? We're actually trying to give them information they can take action on. And so in this case, this company found that within 3 weeks from doing that and focusing on just the top 5 or less, sharing it with their salespeople, they gained traction, which they're already beginning to see now in terms of revenue.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. So the next series of questions we had emails on, and like I said, feel free to chat in anything else that anybody in the live audience is considering. But the next series of questions surrounded around long-term strategy and how companies that are larger, it becomes so much more difficult to communicate their strategy, to get everyone on the same page, and really working on the right things that are moving their strategy forward. So I'd like to ask some of those questions on that topic. The first question that we got was from our friend Joan in England. Hello, Joan, and good evening to you. She said, my people are highly skilled and very smart, but we have multiple locations around the world. How can I be sure that they are all focused on the right things and are connecting what they're doing every day to our long-term strategy? So who would like to take that one?
I'll go.
Thank you, Kris.
You know, when I think about this question, I realize that this is really why that left-hand side of your one-page strategic plan is so important. That left-hand side that talks about core values, core purpose, BHAG, brand promise. You know, if you really spend the right amount of time working through those things and then communicating them to the rest of the company and giving people the opportunity to create their own rhythms around understanding how their role contributes to those, that's going to get you what you're looking for. It's, you know, it's easy when you're starting up and you're getting going and you're still small enough that you know everybody's name that works in the company. But when you have that opportunity, you can see for yourself that they understand your vision. You can have one-on-one conversations with them and be sure of what they're thinking. But as you pass 50 people, 100 people, you have multiple locations, different time zones, it becomes harder and harder for you to know for sure. So the key to making sure that your folks really get this big picture stuff is your key to confidence in what they're doing daily. So think about core values. You know, if your people really understand your core values and you've done a good job of identifying them and communicating them and bringing them to life in your organization, then people are going to understand how they should be working. You know, any employee in any situation should be able to look at the core values and know whether they should or shouldn't move forward with something, how they should respond to a situation that comes up. Core values should be a guiding force on daily activity for your people. Next, think about core purpose. If they understand and connect with that core purpose, then they'll understand why they're doing what they're doing. And understanding why is so important because, you know, you can tell people what to do all day long, but if they don't understand why, you'll never have that level of commitment that you really need to have an accountable organization. Think about the BHAG. Everyone in the company should know what that BHAG is. It's not just something that you and the executive team visit, you know, annually when you're working on your company plan for the year. The BHAG should be something that is a driving force in your business. It should be part of your quarterly focus and, you know, a daily or weekly question that your managers and supervisors are aware of and that they completely understand how they contribute to moving you forward toward that BHAG. You know, I know a lot of times when we're thinking about whether or not we should go, you know, a lot of different things come up from time to time and we have to make a decision about whether we should do this or shouldn't. We look at our core values, our core purpose, and our BHAG, and we say, does this get us one step closer? And the real trick to knowing that all of your employees are engaged and focused on the right things is to make sure that your company has a healthy rhythm for strategic thinking, execution planning, and doing the work. When you think about those three activities, strategic thinking, execution planning, and doing the work, that's what's going to connect daily execution to long-term vision and strategy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have a follow-up question from John. He wrote in and he said, no, thank you. I think I've done a pretty good job communicating this with my people, but I still have some that just don't seem to be bought in. What can I do to help them get on board?
Gosh, that's a great question. And it happens over and over again. And the truth is, there's some people that just aren't ever going to get it. I mean, if you have done a good job of identifying your core values and you're bringing them to life and you're using them in the recruitment process and in your appraisal process and, you know, built into your performance compensation program and, you know, your core purpose is meaningful and, you know, everybody else can connect to it. If you've got somebody in the organization who still just doesn't get it, then chances are they're not probably an A player in your organization. And, you know, I think this is a really great example of why it's so important to use core values and top grading methodology in your selection process.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have another question that was sent in from Paul. He was talking about hitting the growth wall. This is a very common thing, I think. Kris and Mary, we hear this from our clients all over the world. And he said, we've been growing fast for the past 5 years. But as we've gotten larger, we're finding it harder and more stressful to grow. How do we get our growth momentum back?
I'd like to answer that because I've had
Okay.
a lot of communication and talk around this just recently. First of all, congratulations on your growth. It sounds like you've hit one of those walls that we've been talking about, which is a growth wall. But because of your growth, there's a great likelihood that your time is being sucked into the black hole of busyness. Many clients discover that they're saying yes to everything rather than focusing on their core business and saying no to the right things. The cure here is specific, regular think time focused on the development of winning moves. And winning moves are very closely tied to key thrust with one very clear delineating difference. Winning moves will 2-time your business in the next 3 to 5 years. So the bigger your enterprise, the more disciplined you actually have to be. This is a 13-week race that I mentioned earlier. We want to be ready for the race the moment the gate opens. And additionally, I'm going to suggest that you stop failing slowly. Now, my word for this, I get a laugh from that sometimes, but my word for this is I want you to fast fail. We don't want to drag this out. I want a quick implosion over an okay reception, or what we might call milquetoast sales. It's better for us that our ideas, our products, and our services go down in flames quickly than it is for them to expire slowly like a frog in a boiling pot. Now, let me give you an example of this, because one company that we should all know is Craigslist, and I think they're a classic example of what I call failing slowly. They had first mover advantage that rivaled Amazon and eBay. Yet, if you would go to their site today, and all of us I think have been there, and many of us probably still use it, the site feels and works much the way it did in 1999. And while it's still popular, smaller firms are now managing to steal customers, and thus they pose what appears to be an ignored threat to Craigslist. So currently, Craigslist, what they've been doing is they've reduced themselves to suing their competitors for copyright infringement, rather than taking the time to think about winning moves and then taking action towards those winning moves so that they can elevate the playing field. So here's the thing that I constantly say to clients. When you find yourself constantly giving your service or your product CPR, then you should stop and consider whether it's worth saving the life of that particular product or service. It may be time for you to move on to something that's more of a winning move. Here's a recent example. It's an electric car company, Coda. They're a recent victim of what I call overly optimistic green startup company. They filed for bankruptcy after raising $300 million. They burned through most of it, and yet it seems that they were surprised that customers didn't care for a plain vanilla $37,000 starting price car. Now that's a pretty expensive misstep. The negative customer purchase and feedback should have been caught by a Gazelle-like company much earlier. And so one way that we advise our clients to overcome that is through what we call a comparably inexpensive prototype. And if you think of that, a product version is something that's designed to reach your customers' hands, either as a product or service, well before you make any large investment in it. Let's not go broke until we know if we've got what our customers and clients want. Palm Pilot was what I call the original classic sort of example of that. What Palm Pilot did, the users carried around a prototype that was formed from a block of wood. They carried this around with them before they ever put all their money into the research and development. Now that may seem primitive to us, but the idea is to spend some time thinking about ways to get cheap mock-ups or cheap versions into your users' hands before creating your full-fledged expensive product. This radically speeds up product and service evolution. It, especially during your growth time, and that saves you a lot of cash. That's critically important, because when you think about growth, if you've not experienced it yet, and if you're a company over 100 employees, I think you have, growth burns cash. And so we want to make sure that we're doing everything to save that cash while we're doing it. So the answer here is think time for winning moves, execute your prototype or prototype fast to see which ones will crash and go down in flames, and if it does go down in flames, step out of the ashes into a rhythm of thinking to determine your next winning move.
Barry, that point you made about failing fast reminds me of Jim Collins' concept of bullets before cannonballs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go in and test some things and see what works before you invest too heavily.
That's right. Exactly right.
Yeah, and I think, I'd also like to share something from our own company. I mean, we use all of these methodologies in growing our firm. And one of the things that, I thought was a really exciting and innovative concept that was done by our development team is as we were considering moving from Rhythm 1 to Rhythm 2, and making a significant jump, we wanted to challenge ourselves to really adhering to our brand promise, which is simplicity. And so one of the things that we did is before building a new web version of version 2, we actually made a decision to build it in an iPad version. There were a ton of restrictions for simplicity. Steve Jobs was best known for delivering in that. And if we could produce a wonderful experience for the basis of Rhythm version 2 in that, then we knew that that would help us. So that was one of the ways that we were able to test and put it in the marketplace. And it helped us. Version 2 will be coming out in a couple of months. And we're very, very, very excited that we were able to test that and get great feedback on making sure our product lived our brand promise. So I have a follow-up question, actually, that just came in. Thank you, Ryan, for sending that to us. We have the opposite problem. This is interesting. He said, we have a lot of opportunities to pursue, and we're having difficulty figuring out which ones are the right winning moves. Any advice for Ryan? Does anyone have any advice?
Yeah, so one thing is that you need to make sure that you preserve your core business while you're stimulating progress. You want to understand what your core business is, what we might call a hedgehog, some of the language that you've heard Kris use, BHAG, etc. If you're unfamiliar with those terms, one great resource for you is to go to our blog and go to the right side, and you can look things up by topic category. And then you can go do some research around that. But you need to use your BHAG to help you decide this, and I think that would be a good start.
You know, another thing when you're evaluating potential winning moves is to rank them, to take a look at, brainstorm what are all the potential opportunities that we have in front of us, and then kind of collaborate and think together on which ones seem to have the most legs to them, which ones can we really carry forward, and then take some of the subjectivity out of it and actually put a scale to it. Rank them on impact. Which ones out of these that are potentially in front of us would have the potential to maybe double our business over the next 3 to 5 years, and then kind of use that as a gauge to tell you which ones have the potential for the biggest impact. And then secondly, take a look at how easily you could actually execute this. If it's something that plays to your strengths, it's aligned with your business already. Barry talked about understanding what your core business is and protecting that. Find something that will stimulate growth that isn't going to be contrary to what you're currently doing, because you certainly don't want to take on a winning move at the expense of your core business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the exciting things that we found in our new version of Rhythm, as we've had a chance to beta test it just before it rolls out, is this idea of measuring and putting a measurement on your winning moves and how they might play out, along with the dialogue that goes with that. Now, for someone who's not a client that's not a Rhythm, it's very easy for you to do this with an Excel spreadsheet or to find some other way, but you're looking for a way to archive the communication and the collaboration that goes on around those winning moves, so that in the event there were a change and you needed to change its ranking compared to others, then you have some valid reasons and history to back it up.
Great, thank you. We had another question that came in, a very good question actually, and they asked about brand promise. And the question was, we have a lot of people who do not come in direct contact with the customer. So what is the best way to make sure everyone is focused on delivering on our brand promise? So who would like to take that?
Well, I love the fact brand promise is it's a lot of work. Many times we have clients that look at brand promise, think that they'll sit down and have a 15-minute to 30-minute meeting and they'll walk out with the perfect brand promise. Yet we read and know that even with Jim Collins as a guide, that Starbucks took a year to actually nail that down for themselves. The bold thinking and risk-taking that we find that are a hallmark of a successful entrepreneur often become the company's undoing once it matures to 100 people plus in a company. Starting a company often involves an entrepreneur to ignore the doubters and maybe pig-headedly take a leap of faith. But later, that kind of pig-headedness actually leads to executives ignoring critical warning signs like unhappy customers or perhaps team members that aren't totally bought into this idea of brand promise. So first thing that you want to do is verify that your brand promise is clear and easy to articulate. We want to create a brand promise KPI dashboard, or key performance indicators, and what we're going to do is assign each of the activities to a person to monitor. And then I recommend that you review those in your weekly meetings. You don't have to be in daily, although we do have some companies that do, but in the weekly meeting to make sure that you're on track. And then don't forget to ask each department to consider how they can best support it. This is not just a sales team or a marketing team effort. This is a company effort to back up brand promise. So you can share your wins and losses, for example, against for brand promise across the enterprise. And every department and every team member should know how what they do supports delivering on brand promise. Now, here's an example. Recently, we had a client who started focusing on this. And what happened was, because they started asking different departments, how can you support our brand promise? The shipping department on their own decided that what they would do for all tickets that came in, they would pull the tickets that were for their brand promise customers, A-plus customers as they labeled them, and that they would actually mark those tickets so that throughout the process, everyone who touched the ticket would know that this is part of a brand promise to one of our A-plus customers. And so they started making changes immediately, and now that got other departments thinking, well, what can we do? They did something that's visible throughout the company with people who don't really feel like they have a direct link to brand promise. So an example for me is starting as a Yale and Harvard graduate many years ago, a guy named Victor Kayan began at Lever Brothers selling cosmetics. By 1979, he had amassed enough money to buy a company called Remington, which had lost a lot of money in the previous years, but he bought it and a leveraged buyout. He was quickly able to turn that company around. He was also a guy who wrote and starred in the Remington commercials. And if you're as experienced as I am, those of you who are listening, you might hear that as old as I am. You may remember that in his very first commercial, Victor Kayan said this, "I liked it so much, I bought the company." And I've recently seen two CEOs take Victor Kayan's idea for promoting complete alignment and turning companies around that were in trouble, turning them around fast and driving brand promise delivery throughout their entire enterprise. Here was Victor's idea. He got a $50 bill at the bank once a week for an entire year, put it in his pocket, and while wandering around the company, walking from department to department, he randomly picked people to ask them this question: what's our mission at Remington? He kept asking that question day in and day out of the week until someone was able to answer it. They got the $50 bill, and then he started the process over again the next week. He continued that for the full year, but what he said was that after 4 weeks, he rarely had to ask more than 2 people. This idea allowed his people to be aligned from the front row to the back seat. Everybody throughout the company knew what they were supposed to be doing. So this may be an idea seed for somebody who's listening in today. Maybe it's an idea starter for them.
Great.
You know, Barry, thinking about this question and a couple of the others about planning and about KPIs, it occurs to me how important the role of the executive team as leaders of departments is. You know, in these elite 2% companies, to really take a look at who's leading your departments, because each one of those people, they have the opportunity to really help their departments and people all the way down to the front line see how they connect to these big picture things. And it takes time and effort to do that.
It does. And, you know, a lot of times we find that companies have a great idea. They put a lot of energy and effort into what they want it to be, in this case, brand promise. What they don't do is build it into their day in and day out language. When they talk to people and they're talking about something that could relate to how they have purposely helped or perhaps hurt brand promise, they're not making the link for their team. So one of the recommendations is to make sure that you are verbalizing this brand promise into the day-to-day activities that people are taking in your workplace.
We have another question that came in. And one of the questions I have, we hear this a lot, is they talk about what is some good ways or practical ways to build your leadership team so that they can be ready to help with strategy. You know, a lot of them were hired because they were very skillful, but the company's changed so much as they've gotten larger. Do any of you have any ideas on any practical ways that you could help to build that leadership team? I thought your point about departmental leaders is absolutely huge, especially when, you know, it might be in multiple locations and not having as much contact.
Quote about, you know, that he's not successful because he skates to where the puck is. He skates to where the puck will be. And it's the same thing with your people. You know, you're envisioning future growth for the company and the organization. And so you've got to have your people prepared to be where the company is going to be in the future. And especially if you're successful in executing on these winning moves. I mean, if you think of wherever you are today, if you were twice as big in 3 years, is your team prepared and structured properly to run the business at that level? So, you know, planning your future people path with purpose, that's a lot of P's, is so important. And, you know, taking the time to really think about, you know, what are the key seats that maybe we don't need today and aren't as important, but in the future will be, and how can we start developing people today to fill those seats, and then as well as evaluating those that are in, you know, second level levels of leadership in the company. How can we start developing them today so that they're prepared to move up and move on and support the company at different levels? So it's, you know, a lot of work around developing for the future.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was thinking that I use a phrase called sloppy now equals failure later. And a lot of times in fast growth companies, we find that they get into the discipline of meeting properly and growing their business, and then they get caught up in the growth of the business. And as a result of that, they start getting sloppy in their meeting habits and the way that they do things. Then they have a need for it again, and what happens is that the people that they needed to be disciplined and to have had the growth lost that opportunity because that time has already been expended. They've already spent it. So one of the easy things that we find companies doing is they start delegating things out to those that they want to grow. You'll never know how someone else can lead a meeting unless you allow them to do that. So you begin letting them lead meetings early. The other thing is that instead of telling, we want to start asking. So quite often as a CEO, especially if you're smaller, you're growing fast, it's been your baby, you birthed it, and you were ready to try and drive it forward. We forget that we hire people that are smart, have good skills, and are willing and able to help if we'll only allow them the leeway to do it. So rather than telling them the things that you need them to do or what they should be doing, you start asking. And you ask them what their opinion is. And basically it gives you several options where you can step in and mentor or grow your people. And so from a specific application, I just want to know, first of all, what is the problem? What's the problem that they have identified? If they cannot articulate that, then they need my help to teach them how to identify and articulate problems. Second is I want to know what are some of the possible causes for that problem? And if you cannot identify the possible causes for the problem, or if you leave some off the list, I want a brainstormed list, then that's a time for me to step in and mentor them on how to identify causes of problems. The third item on that list is to have them identify what are some possible solutions. And it's interesting, when you walk through a process this way, you have identified clear, specific areas that they may need help. And if they make it all the way to the third one and don't need me, then I'm not going to teach them at that level. So I want to know what are the possible solutions. And the last thing is basically, what would you recommend? And if they learn that process and do it well, I've just taught them how to think on their own. Now, instead of them having to do the entire process in advance, I can ask them, what do you recommend we do? Or give me an after-action report. And we're growing our people to think, work, plan, do on their own so that we don't have to be there managing that process.
I'd like to share one other thing that I thought was very innovative from one of our clients. They created what was called a leadership council. And what was really nice about the council is the council wasn't one person that they were developing, it was the next level of the teams. So they not only learned to develop individually, but they learned to develop as a team, as a leadership team, and work together. And that's one of the most critical things that we've seen. You may be personally very good, but you need to make sure that you can work as a team as well when you start to look to the future of the company.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned delete 2% earlier, and that's 100 plus companies that we're seeing, 100 plus employees. The CEO is the lid to that company. They're going to have to develop themselves.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I know that if you had any questions, we have them. We're almost at the end of our time, so I'm going to take one more question, and then we're going to ask you to wait for the survey, please. So our one question is, Jackie asked, how do I know if my executive team is too big? As I'm growing, how do I reorganize without ruffling feathers? This is a very, very sensitive question, and it comes up a lot.
You know, it's more art than it is science, Cindy, at least from my perspective and experience with companies. And the art is that when you get over 6 or 7 people on a team, it's getting harder and harder to make decisions. There's more energy and more time involved in it. And at some point, we find that leaders begin to recognize that there's too much energy being spent on decisions that really aren't that high level or strategic for the company. And that would be one of the markers for me to make that decision. What I've recently found is that we've got one company that ended up with almost 12, in fact, they had 12, I think a 13th that dropped out, people on that team. It was taking too long to make decisions, and they decided to break 2 of them off into subgroups. And when they did that, they were able to make decisions faster and bring them back to the executive level more quickly and then move forward as well.
Thank you. Well, that kind of ends our time for today. We thank you. And like I said, for all of you who have sent in some additional questions, we'll make sure to prepare a blog for you. Feel free to go to our website, www.gazellessystems.com. You can sign on for the blog. On the survey, you'll also be able to check the blog. We'll make sure that you're signed up so that you get the information. So what we're asking you now is that if you could please just let us know some feedback by waiting for the survey. It's going to pop up in just one moment after we're out of the webcast, and we close out the webcast. Our purpose, so talking about our strategic plan at Gazelles Systems, is to change the world one entrepreneur at a time. We spend a great deal of time preparing these webcasts for you, and we would love to know if you find them valuable, we should continue them, or if you have any other topics or ideas or changes that you'd like to make. So if you could give us that feedback, we'd really, really appreciate it. We thank you so much, and for all of you out there, have a wonderful day and wonderful evening for our international clients.